Welcome to Cozy Reads. In today's video, we bring you a short and immersive storytelling summary of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Take your time, relax, and let's dive into this dark and intriguing story. In the heart of Victorian London, amidst the splendor of elegant parlors and the scent of fresh roses, there lived a young man named Dorian Gray. Dorian was extraordinarily handsome, with striking features and a charm that captivated everyone who crossed his path. His beauty was almost otherworldly, and his presence could light up any room. One day, while visiting his friend, the talented painter Basil Hallward, Dorian sat for a portrait that would forever change the course of his life. As Basil painted, he was mesmerized by Dorian's beauty, declaring it the finest work he had ever done. The portrait captured Dorian's youthful innocence, his golden hair, and his brilliant blue eyes. It was a perfect representation of his physical beauty. Watching Basil work was Lord Henry Wotton, a witty and cynical aristocrat with a penchant for hedonism and a love of philosophy. Lord Henry was immediately fascinated by Dorian and his beauty, and he began to talk to him about his views on life. Lord Henry believed in the pursuit of pleasure above all else. He saw beauty as the most important aspect of existence and encouraged Dorian to indulge in every whim, to savor the beauty of youth before it faded. The only way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it, he told Dorian. These words had a profound effect on the young man, planting a seed of desire and discontent in his heart. As Dorian gazed upon the finished portrait, he was struck by its perfection and realized for the first time the fleeting nature of his own youth and beauty. He made a wish, almost without thinking, that he could remain forever young while the portrait aged in his place. Unbeknownst to him, this wish would come true in a most peculiar and terrible way. Time passed, and under Lord Henry's influence, Dorian began to indulge in every vice and pleasure he could find. He spent his nights in decadent clubs, and his days chasing the thrill of new experiences, heedless of the cost to his soul. Despite his hedonistic lifestyle, Dorian's appearance remained as youthful and radiant as ever. Meanwhile, the portrait hidden away in his attic began to change. The painting, once a stunning likeness of a pure young man, started to show the marks of Dorian's sins. A cruel sneer twisted his lips, and lines of vice crept across his once flawless face. The portrait became a mirror of his soul, revealing the darkness that his handsome exterior concealed. Horrified by the changes, Dorian hid the portrait in a locked room where only he could see the evidence of his corruption. Dorian's descent into a life of sin reached a turning point when he fell in love with a beautiful young actress named Sybil Vane. Enchanted by her talent and beauty, Dorian saw her as a living embodiment of the romantic ideals he cherished. They became engaged, and Dorian's heart seemed to soften, hinting at the possibility of redemption. But when Sybil, overwhelmed by love, performed poorly in a play, Dorian's infatuation evaporated. He cruelly broke off the engagement, telling her she was nothing to him now that she was no longer perfect. Distraught, Sybil took her own life. Dorian was initially shocked and remorseful, but Lord Henry quickly convinced him that Sybil's death was an artistic tragedy, something to be appreciated rather than mourned. As Dorian adopted this cold, detached view, he noticed that the portrait had changed again. It now wore a cruel, mocking smile. From that point on, Dorian abandoned all pretense of morality. He sank deeper into a life of corruption, leaving a trail of broken lives and ruined reputations behind him. Yet, no matter what he did, his physical appearance remained unchanged, a constant mask of youthful innocence. The portrait, however, grew ever more grotesque, a monstrous reflection of his inner decay. Years passed, and rumors about Dorian's unchanging youth and questionable lifestyle spread throughout London. Friends who had known him in his youth were shocked by his unchanged appearance, while others who dared to confront him or question his behavior often met with mysterious misfortunes. It was said that there was something unnatural about Dorian Gray, something otherworldly that protected him from the consequences of his actions. Basil Hallward, the artist who had painted the cursed portrait, became increasingly concerned about Dorian's reputation and his soul. One evening, desperate to understand what had happened to his dear friend, Basil confronted Dorian in his home. He implored him to change his ways, to repent and seek redemption. In a moment of desperation, Dorian decided to reveal the terrible secret of the portrait. He led Basil to the locked room and showed him the grotesque painting, now a hideous reflection of all the sins and corruption Dorian had amassed over the years. Basil was horrified, unable to comprehend the darkness that had consumed his once pure friend. He begged Dorian to pray, to ask for forgiveness, but Dorian, overcome with anger and shame, felt a sudden surge of rage. In a fit of madness, Dorian grabbed a knife and stabbed Basil to death, his first act of direct violence. As the life drained from Basil's body, Dorian felt a brief pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by a cold indifference. He disposed of the body with the help of a former friend, now a disgraced chemist, and continued his life as if nothing had happened. Yet, the portrait grew even more grotesque, the hands now stained with blood. Despite his outward composure, Dorian was haunted by Basil's death and the ever-worsening state of the portrait. He became increasingly paranoid, fearing that someone would discover his secret. His once carefree existence became a nightmare, filled with shadows and whispers, his mind tormented by the image of his own corrupted soul. One night, while walking through the foggy streets of London, Dorian encountered James Vane, Sybil's brother, who had long sought to avenge his sister's death. James, recognizing Dorian despite his unchanging appearance, confronted him at gunpoint. Dorian, feigning innocence and playing on his youthful looks, managed to convince James that he was too young to have been the man who wronged Sybil all those years ago. Confused and shaken, James let him go, but the encounter left Dorian more terrified than ever. The fear of retribution gnawed at Dorian's conscience, and he began to see James everywhere, his guilt manifesting as hallucinations. At a country estate during a hunting party, James was accidentally shot and killed, a twist of fate that brought Dorian a momentary relief, but also deepened his paranoia and despair. Desperate to escape the nightmare his life had become, Dorian decided to confront the portrait one last time. Standing before the twisted image, he realized that the painting had not only captured his physical corruption, but also the full extent of his moral degradation. In a final act of defiance and desperation, Dorian seized the knife he had used to kill Basil and stabbed the portrait, hoping to destroy the evidence of his sins. In an instant, a terrible cry filled the house. The servants rushed upstairs, breaking down the door to find a scene of horror. The once beautiful portrait hanging on the wall, restored to its original, unblemished state, and on the floor, a decrepit, withered old man, a knife plunged into his heart. Only by the rings on his fingers could they recognize him as Dorian Gray. In the end, Dorian's wish had come true in the most tragic way. He had preserved his outward beauty at the cost of his soul, leaving behind a legacy of ruin and despair. The portrait, now a reminder of the man he once was, served as a haunting testament to the dangers of vanity and the price of living without a conscience. And so, the story of Dorian Gray came to a dark and fitting end, a cautionary tale of the perils of unchecked desire and the inevitable decay of the human spirit. Thank you for listening to our narrated summary of this classic tale. We hope it brought you relaxation and that you enjoyed this journey through timeless literature. If you liked today's summary and wish to delve into the full story, check out the link in the comments to get the full textbook. Please consider subscribing for more relaxing reads. Until next time, keep the stories alive and the pages turning.